Hello, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today. This is Tax 1099 training for small to medium businesses. Thank you so much for joining. This session will be recorded. You can look for it on our training page. In about a week, we'll have that up for you. Also, on the side of your screen, you'll see that we have a handout, which is the PDF of the slides. So you can download that and follow along if you'd like to do so. We have a lot to cover today, so I'm just going to jump right into the introductions. We're going to be talking with Ed Pratt, who is our Chief Operating Officer here at Zenwork. Ed has 19 years of experience in compliance outsourcing, including human resources, payroll, and tax. He's been assisting our Tax 1099 clients for the past 4 years, and he's going to be happy to talk with us today. A couple of housekeeping items. If you have any questions for us throughout this session, go ahead and use the chat box on the right side of your screen to ask those questions. We'll have a short question and answer period at the end of this session, and any questions we don't answer, we'll follow up with you by email. If you have any trouble with your audio, you can use that phone number you see on your screen, or you can go to GoToWebinar's support website. So today during this session, we're going to be talking about our season updates to Tax 1099, including some new dashboard enhancements, some new forms, and Ed will get into that later. We'll also go through the process of creating forms and scheduling and editing forms. We'll talk about form corrections, and then, like I said, we'll have time at the end for some questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Ed now to talk about this season's Tax 1099 updates.
Thanks, Geneva, and welcome everyone to the session. I appreciate you being able to join. I am going to share out my screen with you, and should be on the same slide that Geneva just left us off with there, talking about the different updates that we've made for this tax season. Just kind of in general, most of the site has remained the same this year. So when you come in, you'll notice the dashboard enhancements that we're going to talk about in just a minute. So when you first log into the site for this year, you'll see that. But behind that, most everything else has remained the same. So forms are where you would have found them before. Creating forms is where you would have done that before. Integrations will work the same way for the most part. But I'm going to talk a little bit about those things and go into the site and actually show you around a little bit. But first, just a couple of pretty important updates. We've got two things here at the top of this list, the W-2 import from QuickBooks Desktop and some additional forms that we have. Some of those things are generally more pertinent to our accounting and bookkeeping clients, but we know we have small business clients who may use those as well. So the W-2 import from QuickBooks Desktop, if you're using QuickBooks Payroll, you may already be just submitting those W-2s through QuickBooks Payroll. But again, for our accountant and bookkeeping clients, many of them wanted a way that they could keep their clients' W-2s and 1099s in the same place, that being Tax 1099. And so they asked if we could build out a tool that would allow them to import their W-2s from QuickBooks Desktop into Tax 1099. And so we've done that. And it's really enabled them to just go through the creation of the W-2 on QuickBooks Desktop, get it to the PDF form, and then import the PDF into Tax 1099 to generate an eFile for the W-2s that we send to the Social Security Administration, which then sends it to the IRS, and then also having the capability of printing and mailing forms from Tax 1099 or downloading the PDF, similarly to what you would do for a 1099 miscellaneous form. So we've built that, and it is available currently in the site if that's something that any of you guys need as you're working through running your business. The additional forms that are there, the 941 corrected, X stands for corrected. What we find, or what we have found in the past, is that clients who needed to do a corrected 941, that 941 is your quarterly payroll tax filing where you're reporting out your FUTA and things like that. That 941 corrected form is something that comes up periodically, and they're hard to find. It's just something that you may have difficulty actually getting a form, or getting an accountant that you may be working with to even find that form. So we've built that out in the system. The one difference with that 941X form is that it is not an e-fileable form. The IRS doesn't accept e-files for the 941 corrected version. So it is something that you would be able to complete, print out, and mail in to the IRS via the PDF copy that we would provide. And then the 943, the other new form that you see there, is for the agricultural reporting. So if you have a farm, you work with farmers, then you may need to be reporting those annual reports out on a 943 form instead of a 940 form. And then the other thing that I mentioned earlier that we're going to look at in a little bit more depth are the dashboard changes. So let's talk a little bit about what those dashboard changes look like. There's a couple of ways that you're going to notice a change. So, and I'm going to show you this in just a minute, but you can go in quickly at a glance into the dashboard. As soon as you log in, you'll be presented with the dashboard, and you'll be able to see the status of the forms that you might have filed, or the forms that you've created. You may not have filed them yet, but our dashboard will now tell you the status of those forms. This is a request that we had last year from both small business and medium-sized businesses and accountants that we make it a little bit more obvious what had been filed or created and not filed in your account record. And so the dashboard is going to let you do that. It's going to let you see the status of those forms, the date that you last did something with those forms, whether that was creating the form or submitting the form. You'll see the taxpayer identification number in a truncated format, meaning only the last 4 digits display for the payer, so your company, along with the company name there. You'll see the total amount of the forms that are there. So let's say you're filing 10 1099 miscellaneous forms, and you have each one of those as $1,000 in box 7. You'd see a total of $10,000 and the number of forms that would be there as well. So you can kind of compare and contrast back to your accounting software if you're using an accounting software, or if you're doing record keeping on an Excel sheet or some other form, then you can compare back to that and make sure that you've got the same numbers there. Just giving you a little bit of a cross check and a reference point to make sure that you've got the right information going here into Tax 1099 so that you are true with what you're filing to the IRS. The form type, so most people who are in this session are likely filing the 1099 miscellaneous form with us, but occasionally you may have an interest form or a dividend form or a patronage form or any of the other types of forms that we file, and so it'll tell you that as well. And then the scheduled date is the date that it's going to go to the IRS. With our platform, you can schedule that so that we can send it to the IRS on the deadline date. And as you're probably familiar, last year, the IRS changed that deadline date for your Box 7 on the 1099 miscellaneous and for your W-2s. It had previously been March 31st and now has been moved to January 31st. That stayed the same for this year. So the Box 7 amounts are still going to be due on January 31st, and the W-2 are still going to be due on January 31st to the IRS or the Social Security Administration. All the forms are due to the recipient on January 31st. So you have to get them in the mail, postmarked by January 31st, or you have to send out that email to the recipient by January 31st as well. And that scheduled date that's on here, again, refers to specifically the IRS filing, the e-filing that'll take place for that form. Within the dashboard, we'll also have some filtering capabilities, and you can filter out by the TIN or the name or the form status or by the year. And so now that I've talked about these a little bit, let's go take a look at what that dashboard is going to look like. I'm going to bring that up here for you so you can see what that will look like. If you may recall, last year, when you would log in, the dashboard looked pretty different than this. We had a little video here, and then in the kind of left side of the page, we had I'm going to click this blue button up here. We had these what would you like to do links, so you could kind of go in and do a specific task in the system, whether that was starting a new filing or printing out an existing form. Those were part of the dashboard, so they were embedded here as links. And then below that, we had some items that were enabled you to go in and do see the last 3 filings or see the last 3 10 matches or W-9s, things like that you may have seen in the dashboard in the past. So this year, what we've done is we've reorganized, and as I mentioned earlier, we're giving you some options here for searching for different company names that you may have here that you've done filings for, searching for different statuses, so I can pull up only my forms that are not submitted, and so I can see what each one of those are. I can go in, I can pull up any rejected forms, which I don't have any. I can pull up any just accepted forms. And so I can see all of that here straight on the dashboard. I can also sort it out so that I'm only seeing things from certain years. So if I go back to 2015, I can see all of these accepted forms from 2015. I might look at not submitted, and so I can see all of the not submitted forms from 2015 as well. So just lots of different ways that you can go in and kind of really quickly at a glance see what your forms are looking like. And here's those amounts and form types and form counts and the scheduled date that I mentioned. You can also go in and view or print those forms from here as well. So lots of opportunity for you just to kind of quickly jump in and see what's going on inside the dashboard. We sent an email out a couple of weeks ago to all of our users just announcing that we were changing this dashboard and putting in some information about what that dashboard would look like. So we do have that available. We also, as Geneva mentioned earlier, are having this recorded, and so you'll be able to access this session and come back in and just review this information again if you need to. We'll also be putting together some short videos for different tasks that you can do in the system, and one of those will review the dashboard as well, just so you can kind of see what all that will look like. So we're going to give you some additional information about all of this as you're preparing into your tax season. A couple of other things that are on here. Up at the top right, you've got some buttons. If you just hover over the buttons, it'll tell you what they're for. You have your logout option there. You have the settings, so that'll tell you what your email address is registered at. If you wanted to change your registered email address, you could do it there. If you need to get into our support area, if you need to go in and see the step-by-step instructions for doing things, that is available there as well. And then again, that blue plus sign there, just expanding that out, gives you the quick link to go in and see and do those particular tasks that you may have in the system. There's a blue button here as well that says Start New Filing, and so that Start New Filing will just take you right into the form filing, and I'm going to talk about form filing here in just a minute, so I'm not going to do that, but it is a quick method for getting you started on one of those form filings. So aside from the dashboard, everything in the white here, the stuff on the left is still the same, like I mentioned before. So if you wanted to go through, you can see what your forms are like. You can go in and print those forms from the Manage Forms page. You can submit forms from the Submit Forms page. You can see all of your recipients here and what tasks you may be able to perform with those recipients there as well. And then importing, I'm going to talk about a little bit here in a minute as well. And that is there in the same page as well. All right, so those are the dashboard enhancements, and as Geneva mentioned earlier, please ask any questions that you have. Put those in the chat. We will get to those as we get to the end of the session here, and be able to answer hopefully all of those questions before the end of the session. And if not, we will reply back in email to you with a response for those questions that we might not be able to get to. So let's talk a little bit about creating forms. If you're a small business or a medium business owner or someone who works in a small or medium-sized business and needs to do the form creation, there's several different ways that you can get those forms in. And really it depends on what types of tools you use to help run your business. You know, if you use QuickBooks or you use Xero or you use Zoho or Bill.com, use some sort of software to help run the books in your business. We have integrations with those platforms, and we can bring the data over, help you bring the data over anyway with those platforms. We also have an Excel import. I'm going to demonstrate what that looks like here in just a minute. So you can bring the data in from an Excel spreadsheet. We have clients who use larger ERP systems, SAP or Oracle, and they need to be able to bring their data in through an Excel spreadsheet. And so we have that available. We even have people who track all of those payments manually through an Excel spreadsheet and want to bring them in through through that Excel spreadsheet. So we offer that capability. And then for our clients who are only doing a handful of forms or even 10 or 12 forms, if you've already used the service 1 year, all your data is still going to be in there from the prior year. So you'll be able to go through and just select your payer and recipient and then add in the amount. And I'll show you what that looks like here in a minute as well through a manual form creation process. So lots of ways that you can get the data into Tax 1099. When I show you the manual form process, I'll also talk about a corrected form filing. So I mentioned the pushed to the push date, the earlier date for the POC 7 and the W-2 filings last year. So with that date being pulled up to January 31st for the eFile from March 31st, that meant that a lot of our users needed to file more corrected forms than they had done in the past. And we can file corrected forms for you, whether you filed them originally on our platform or not. You can come in and you can do a corrected filing. You can even do a corrected filing from prior years if you needed to do that, or even a regular form from a prior year, because we do go back a couple of years and offer the capability for doing form processing from the prior years. There's a couple of different types of corrections. Typically, what you're correcting in a corrected form is just an amount. You will send out the 1099 to your vendor, and maybe you said they had $7,000, and they contact you back and say, "No, that wasn't right. Part of that was an expense reimbursement. It shouldn't be considered part of the services that I provided, and so it should only be $6,000." And so you might need to do that corrected type of form filing through that process. The second type is if they had an incorrect TIN or name, and that is a more complicated process. You've got to void the original form out with the incorrect data, and then you've got to go in and do a new form, not a corrected form, but a new form, so that you can send it with the right name and TIN. And we have detailed instructions on doing each one of these tasks in Tax 1099 in our support menu. So let me take you in again real quickly here and show you around a little bit about doing some of those form creation, whether it's through an import or through a manual form creation process. I'm going to start with doing an Excel spreadsheet. Excuse me. I'm going to start doing an Excel spreadsheet, and when I click that, I'm going to get options here for bringing in my my different types of forms. And so I'm just going to pause for a second and look at the different types of forms that we have here. We have a lot of 1099 forms, as you would expect. If you have the need for any of these other forms, though, 3921, 22, the 1042S, the 1098, your 1095B and C, those Affordable Care Act forms that are still in place for now. Maybe later they'll change, but for now those are still required if you are required to provide those. And then the W-2 is there as well. I'm going to do a 1099 miscellaneous, and again, just going to import this through an Excel format. I've already got an Excel sheet that's prepared, but you can download our Excel version of the template that you can use to make sure you've got all of the correct data that you might need. I generally tell people to download the Excel version of that because it has some instructions on it that lets you know what the data is that we're looking for those specific ones. The CSV doesn't have that contained in it, so it's usually better to start with the Excel version. And you can also do these as corrected form filings if that's something you need to do. So like I said, I've got one already. I'm just going to go and find the one that I want here, and I'm going to import a form filing here. I'm going to click Next, and what the system is going to do is review the information that's on my Excel sheet. And we give you a lot of options here, but I'm not going to need to take any of those options because my Excel sheet is the template that we've provided, and so everything matches up exactly as it should. So I get this message, please map the highlighted fields. That's solely so that I can go in and tell it what year I want to do my tax filing for, and I'm going to do it for 2017. But then if I needed to, if there were something on my spreadsheet, if I were using a non-template version of the spreadsheet, then I would have some other red boxes here, and I could go in and I could make sure that my data is going to the right place so that it appears correctly on the form. You might notice if you've seen the paper forms in the past that this looks pretty much just like what that paper form looks like. And so it's organized in a familiar format for people who may have used a paper filing process in the past. I just had that one thing to choose. I was going to choose the tax year, and so I'm going to click Next. And then the next thing that we do is we review data on the spreadsheet that you are bringing in, just to make sure that it conforms to IRS formatting regulations. As you might suspect, the IRS got a lot of rules. So some of their rules include simple things like you have to have a 5-digit zip code or a 9-digit zip code. You have to have a 9-digit taxpayer identification number. You've got to have a city and a state and a zip code. So, very simple kind of validation rules that the IRS imposes. And if you fail those validation rules, then you won't be able to submit your form. We've been working with IRS for years, so we know what all those rules are. And so we will look at your data and we'll say, yes, that's good. We'll give you a little green dot there. Or we'll say something's missing or invalid and it's required, and we'll give you a red dot there. And then the yellow will appear here at the top. This is your company name, Class Act in this case, but that would be whatever your company name is. The yellow will appear there if you have something that's going to be a stopper. And if I scroll down a little bit here, I can see down here at the bottom that I've got a red dot next to Sam Fields' name. Now, I'm doing a very small import here, so I only have 10 forms. You may have, though, dozens or hundreds. We have clients who are doing tens of thousands of forms that they're importing all at one time. So we built in this flag option here so that I can see just what is incorrect in this filing. So I know I've got something wrong because I've got the yellow dot here. This red dot, if I filter based off of that red dot, I'm going to bring back only the things that have a problem. Now, I want to stop here for just a second and mention that if I'm doing one of these other import types, if I'm bringing my data in from Xero or QuickBooks Online or Bill.com or any of these guys over here, I've got the same opportunity here. I can look at only what is causing, excuse me, only what is causing a problem in my filing. So that is a good benefit because you can just focus on the problems and solve those problems and then continue on with your filing. You might have a question that would be, where should I fix it? Should I go back to my accounting software and fix it? Should I fix it here in Tax 1099? And the answer really is, it depends on your situation. You can fix it in your accounting software and then bring it back over. You can fix it in your Excel spreadsheet and re-import it, or you can fix it here in Tax 1099, and probably it depends on where you are in January. If you're doing this January 5th, then fix it in your accounting software and bring it back over, because then you'll have it right in both places. If you're doing it at 10 p.m. Eastern time on January 31st and barely scraping to meet the deadline there, fix it here in Tax 1099, and that way you'll have it available and you can go ahead and proceed with your filing. Before you fix it, though, here in Tax 1099, I want to point out this downloadable error list that you see here. You can click that and it will bring down a spreadsheet that will show Sam Fields, and it will tell us what's wrong with Sam Fields' information, which we don't know yet because I haven't clicked on Sam's name, but it'll be pretty obvious when I click in there. But that downloadable error list would let me take my information back. So even if I fix it in Tax 1099, I've got a reference, I've got a spreadsheet that says Sam Fields had something incorrect with his information, and I can take that back and fix it in my original, excuse me, in my original software. So with all that said, I'm just going to click on Sam's name, and like I said, it'll be pretty obvious what we're missing here. My state is completely blank, so I don't have anything for Sam's state. It might be a city, it might be a zip code that's only 4 digits. So any of those things might be incorrect. So I happen to know that this is California, but let's say I picked Alabama. Well, Alabama's not going to work because that zip code is not valid for Alabama. And it's giving me a message to enter a valid zip code. What it really means is my state and my zip code don't match. And so I need to pick the right state for that zip code. And so I'm going to pick California. I'm going to click update, and you're going to notice a couple things happen when we refresh the page here. Sam's no longer there, and in fact, nobody's there. But I still have 10 items here, and that's because I still have my filter turned on. I'm going to clear that in just a second. And once I clear that, I'm going to see that, that I no longer have that downloadable error list. So there's no errors now. I fixed the error. So if you do have errors, you want to fix those, or you want to download that spreadsheet first. So you make sure that you get access to that error, that you can come back and you can fix it in your accounting software at some point later in time. You'll also notice that Class Act, my company name, now has a green dot next to it. So it's good data all below, and Sam down here has a green dot as well. So everything is kosher now with regards to the expectations that the IRS has for the formatting of the data. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that my recipient taxpayer identification number and my recipient name are matching. We do offer a service called TinMatch that lets you check that, but you're not checking that at this point. You're just checking the formatting of that information and making sure that it's in the right and proper format for the IRS to receive. couple more things you can do here. So I know I'm going through a lot of stuff, but a couple of more things that you can do here if you find that something's wrong here. And again, you're pressing the deadline. That's January 31st. And I look at Ann and I say, oh no, that's not supposed to be $5,000. That's supposed to be $3,000. I can simply go in and I can fix Ann's information there. And maybe it was supposed to be box 1 and I've just got it in the wrong place. I can fix it to box 1 from box 7. I can click update, and that's what will get reported out on the form. We don't send this information back to your accounting software, so you'd need to make sure you export this out at some point or go back to your accounting software and fix it at some point. But that would give you the ability to be flexible in what you're working with here and make some modifications. At the same time, I could take a couple of these if I needed to, and I can use this apply to selected recipients, and I can change their box number. So if I needed to send that instead of box 7 to box 14, I can do that. So just some manipulations that you can make with the data if you find you need to in Tax 1099. Like I said earlier, I would always advise that you do this in your accounting software if you have time. If you're pressed for time, do it here. But if you have time, do it in your accounting software or wherever you're storing that original data, and then bring it back over here. So let's just kind of think about the process that I went through. I brought in an Excel spreadsheet, and the system told me that I had some incorrect data. I fixed that, and so now I'm ready to proceed forward. I haven't created any forms yet. That's what I'm going to do in the next step. But to this point, I haven't actually created any forms. If I needed to just stop this right here, I can do that, and then I could re-import my information later if I needed to. But the next step is going to be actually creating the forms. And again, that applies for any of these types of imports that you might be doing. So I'm going to select everything, and then as I scroll down to the bottom, I've got one more little check that I can do. I've got my page amount and my total amount for what I'm filing here. So if I think back to my accounting software that I'm getting this out of, or my Excel spreadsheet that I'm getting this out of, where I'm maintaining this information, I can compare and contrast what this total is back over to what that total was in my original software, and just make sure that my totals are matching. So it's just another check off, another audit point where you can say, yes, this is matching, this looks good, this is what I'm expecting to have for my my filing. So now that I've done that, I'm going to click on the next button. I selected all 10 of those forms. I'm going to click on the next button. It's going to take me over into my submit forms page. I'm going to get a little message, 10 out of 10 records uploaded successfully, and I'm going to click OK. Now, on this page, this is the checkout page. This is where you're going to select what you want us to do with this information. And for me, you'll notice that I've got 4 Ann Gables in here. You can see, though, I imported them all different times, different dates. So I've obviously done this before. And it's fake information, so I'm not actually submitting it to the IRS. But you can see what you're submitting here. So I've got this one for Ann from 11/29. I've got this one for Eric from 11/29. Those are the ones that I did for today. Other things you can do here, you can have us mail the forms out for you. We do offer that service. They're printed inside of those tab pressure sealed envelopes that have the little perforated edges on the side, so they're nice and sealed up. No data exposure can be done there. We do also truncate the taxpayer identification number there, so you'll see that the IRS recommends doing that for those last, showing only the last 4 digits for the data security of that recipient. If I had email addresses, you see I don't, but if I had email addresses, I could send an email out to that recipient if they're accepting an electronic copy of their 1099. I can also choose to 10 match. That's where we compare the taxpayer identification number and the name to the IRS database. It can help you avoid some B notice issues, some potential penalties that you might get for filing incorrect information. And next here, if I had some states like Oregon or Pennsylvania where I needed to do a separate filing to the state, I could select that here. We automatically file to the combined and federal state filing states. That's 30 plus of the states and a lot of the big states. So California, for example, participates in the combined federal state filing program. So you don't need to do anything extra for California. And so I wouldn't see California listed here. But those one-off states, Pennsylvania, Oregon, and a handful of others that require something, we do those filings as well. Earlier, I mentioned the scheduled date, and so I've got a scheduled date here. You can see it's the 1/16/18 date. That is the date that the IRS actually opens for processing of 2017 tax year forms. And if I hover over this, you can see that that's the date it'll actually be submitted or e-filed to the IRS. Let's say that I want to give myself some extra time. Let's just pretend that it's currently January the 16th, and I want a couple of weeks to be able to send this information out. Well, I'm going to choose January 31st. Excuse me, these are the non-box 7. So you see I've got two options here. I'm going to choose January 31st for my box 7, and I'm going to choose March 31st for my non-box 7. So like box 1, box 6, box 14. I can file those on a later date, and I can sort all those out. The system will do that for me, and it'll apply those dates as applicable. So if you remember, I changed Ann's to March 31st for this form. She's got some others that were box 7 amounts though, so they're scheduled for January 31st. We won't file until that date comes, so you have a chance to come in and make an edit. You don't have to pay us an additional e-file fee for making edits to these scheduled forms. So it's a nice little functionality for you there if you have time. So if you're doing this on January 31st, you won't have time to make any changes to those January 31st forms, but you could make changes to the ones that are still scheduled out for March 31st. So again, just a nice little feature that is available for you there. So I'm going to choose this option here for all of my my forms. That's going to e-file all of these forms. You may be saying, but wait, you're going to file duplicates. Yeah, the system's going to tell us that here in just a second. So I'm also going to choose to mail all those forms out to my recipients. So I'm going to scroll down. You can see I've got 40 because I've done 10 forms 4 different times. And I'm going to get a message here that says the scheduled date may be in the future, but we're going to go ahead and notify those recipients. That mail is going to get out there in 5 to 7 business days. And between now and the scheduled date, you can edit those forms at no additional cost. Now here's where I'm going to say, oh, but you have duplicate records. There's 40 recipients, which is all of mine. So everybody has at least one duplicate out here. Do you want to continue? It's an important message because if you did accidentally duplicate information, you brought your import in 2 different times, or you created a form for somebody twice, you want to be able to catch that before you actually go through with the filing. So be sure you're reviewing those pop-ups as you go through the processing to make sure that you're not missing anything. We've had those pop-ups in for the last several years, but you know how it is, especially if you're pressed for time. Sometimes you don't read the pop-ups fully, but definitely take a look at those pop-ups and make sure that you're proceeding only with what you want to proceed with. So in my case, I would cancel that. I just want to not file all of those forms. I'm going to actually deselect everything and just select this one top form for Ann that I've got up here. Click next and click OK, and it's going to let me go in and have one form for Ann that is selected. So I've got my one form that I'm going to be paying for. I've got a prepaid amount on here, so I would actually only be paying 20 cents for this filing because I have $4.20 in my prepaid account. Now I'm not going to file this. Like I said, this is fake information, so the IRS doesn't want to get that from me. So I'm not going to file it. But let's say that I did click Pay and Submit to eFile. I'm going to get a 9-digit reference number, and if I go back real quickly to the dashboard, that's what you see here in the dashboard. You'll see all of your existing filings. I'm going to pull up the 2017 filings that I've got out here. So I've got some that are out here that I've done for this test situation that I've got out here, and so I can see what those scheduled dates are. I can see all that information, and I've got all of them available right here for me at a quick glance. Now, after I do that filing, the forms themselves also go here into the Manage Forms area. So if I wanted to go in and take a look at those forms, if I wanted to do anything with those forms, I can come here into the Manage Forms area. I'm going to click back for just a second into our PowerPoint, just make sure that I'm not missing anything. So scheduling forms, I covered scheduling the forms as you're checking out. There's also a scheduling option here in the Manage Forms page. So I'll talk about how you can edit that those forms here in the Manage Forms page as well as we get through with that process. But all of your filed forms are going to show here in the Manage Forms page. You can deliver the vendor form. So we saw when we checked out that I can choose mail or email. Well, you may not do it then. You might want to do it later. And so I've got an option for doing that at a later time as well here in the Manage Forms page. I can download the PDF, so I have a copy of them on hand at any time that I want them, even though we'll save them here for you for the next 7 years. You can also download them and store them locally if you would like to do that. And then you can make edits to any of the forms that may require that are scheduled out for a future date. So let's take a look at some of those options here. I'm going to pull up my payer that I was working with there just a minute ago, Class Act. I'm going to look at 2017 filings. And I can see here that I've got one filing that's scheduled out for a future date. I've got a couple that are in the status of submitted to the IRS already. So let's say that I got a contact from Julie, and Julie said, hey, my amount is wrong on my form. I need to get that fixed. Well, there is an edit option that's available here. So under my select actions over here on the right-hand side, I can choose to edit that form. But that is only going to work with a form that's scheduled for a future dated filing. So if your status is submitted to IRS, you can't make any updates to that form. That's why it's important to use that scheduled date as much as possible, to push those to the future as much as you can, because with this form for Joe, if I needed to make a change to Joe's amount, I can go in, I can select the edit option, and I'm going to be able to come in and fix that form for whatever change might need to be made. I haven't filed this to the IRS yet, so I don't need to do a corrected form filing. I don't need to do any sort of processing to Joe's form that is separate. I'm just going to come in here, and if Joe said, hey, it wasn't $6,000, it was $5,000, I check my record, that's right, Joe's correct, I was wrong. I can come in and I can make that change right here, click Save and Continue, and it is going to update the information on the eFile. It's also going to update the information in the records that I can send out to Joe, whether that's an emailed copy or a PDF copy that I can send out to Joe. So just as an example, I'm going to take a look at Joe's form that I have here. I'm going to view his recipient copy, and that'll give us a chance to look at what those PDF copies look like that you can print yourself and send out to your recipients if you want to. You can see my $5,000 figure there that I just changed it to for Joe. What you would do if you wanted to print and mail these yourself, you would just download these, you'd print them out on plain white paper, no form purchase required, just print them on plain white paper. You fold them in 3, and then you put them into a number 10 double window envelope. Anything that you could get from Office Depot or Sam's Club, Costco, any place like that sells them in bulk, or you can get smaller ones at the office stores. But you triple fold them. That's your return address. That's your addressee address, and you can just put a stamp on it and send it out in the mail. And so you can manage that mailing process yourself if you'd like to. If you don't want to go through that process, and let's say you have a bunch of these, then you can have us send it to the Postal Service, through the Postal Service for you. So we'll send that U.S. Postal Service mail out. We do charge an extra fee, $1.50 for that service, but if you don't want to bother with it, then you can do that for us to send those out for you. You can also email a copy to the recipient. If you didn't have an email address like I didn't, and I choose to email it, then it will let you enter an email address. This is particularly useful if they call sometime later in the year even, and they say, I'm getting ready to file my taxes. I don't know what I did with that 1099 that you sent to me. Can you send me a new copy of it? The fastest way to get it to them is by doing this. You enter the email ID, that email address for that person, and click OK, and then it's going to send an email out to that recipient right away. And so they can use that to use for their tax filings for their and keep for their record keeping, because it's a PDF format for them. Some other things that you can do here under this section, we've talked about the view print, we talked about edit in the U.S. Postal Service, that unmasked 10. So I mentioned before that by default, we show on the PDF copy the masked taxpayer identification number, only shows the last 4 digits of that taxpayer identification number by the IRS recommendation for data security. But if you really wanted to see that while this is scheduled, I can unmask the 10. So I can create a PDF that has Joe's full social security number or EIN exposed on it, if that's something that I feel like I need to do. Again, the IRS doesn't want you to do that, but if you feel like you have to, then you can do that in that situation. It has to be scheduled though. Once it's submitted, I can't change that to show the unmasked 10. You can also do things in bulk on this page. So I've been working just with Joe's form here, but let's say that I really wanted to see all of these forms in one PDF. That's what this download all PDF option is for. When I click that option, it's going to give me a zip file, and that zip file is going to contain one PDF that would have 3 copies or 3 forms in it. I've got 2 for Joe and 1 for Julie over there, and so I'd be able to use that. If I wanted to do multiple PDFs, so that would be a zip file that has a separate PDF for each one of my forms, then I could do that as well. And what you'll see there, I think I said open it. There it comes. No, not yet. Let me try it again. Maybe I missed a button when I was going through there. There we go. So now I see Joe, Julie. So I can see them all as separate forms out here in my multiple PDF option. So it kind of just depends on what you want to do. If you want to get all of them in separate PDFs, you can do that. If you want a pretty easy way to print them all at one time in one single PDF, you can do that with the download all PDF. You can also export all this to Excel. One of the cool things about that export to Excel option is that it puts it into that import template that I talked about when I did the import process through Excel. So if you're the kind of company that has the same contractors year after year, and you have more than just a handful, you may want to take advantage of this because you could export that information to Excel from last year. You could go through and you could just change their amounts. You could save it, and then you could come right back in and you could import that file through the Excel spreadsheet process. So very easy to go through and do that option if you've used the service in years past. I can bulk mail out to the recipients. I can bulk email out to the recipients, and I can do the unmasking and remasking of the taxpayer identification numbers. Two more things here. I can block the submission. So if I block the submission, it's going to block all of the forms in a specific filing that I have done. You can't just block one, but you could block all of them if you discovered that you had a big error and you needed to do that. If you just need to get rid of one, then you would file a corrected form and void that form out for that particular individual. And then the other thing I can do here is change the schedule date. So for this, again, I can only change the ones that are already scheduled out for a future date. I can't do one that's already been filed. But for this top one that I've got here, it's currently scheduled for March 2nd. Let's say I want to send it on January 31st instead. I'm going to change that. And I can see the scheduled date now is January 31st. So you can do all those types of things in here. If you have a long list here, you can also just use the search option to find any individual that might be needing something in their form options that you've got there. All right, so we've talked about a lot of different things that you can do out here in the Manage Forms section. One more thing I want to mention briefly: we're in the 1099, W-2, 1095, and so forth section. We have a separate section down here if you're using our 940s and 941s and such that I talked about before. This is where you would find those after you file them, in case you need to print a PDF of any of those copies as well. While we're out here, I just want to mention a couple more things that you can do in the software. These again have been here for a little while, but I just want to mention them in case you aren't aware of what you can do here. I just went into the people and the manage recipient page. So I've got my company name here, and if you have more than one company, then you would have them all listed here as well. You can use our service to send out W-9s to recipients. So you can click the option here. Let me find one I haven't done already. You can click the option here to send a W-9 to this person, and that will let you send an email out with a W-9. They fill it out electronically online, and you can see here what that W-9 will look like. You'll get a notice. It'll come back to you, and you'll see that this person filled it out. You'll see what type of entity classification they have. You'll see what their address is, their social security number or their employer identification, the signature, and the date that they applied to that form as well. So all of that is available, and even better, all that got updated in here when this individual filled out that form. So it's now all correct here in Tax 1099. You might want to send that back over to one of your accounting software. So if I do have a Xero account, if I have a Bill.com, a QuickBooks Online, not desktop, but online account, I can sync it back over there. I can send these recipients back over to QuickBooks and make sure I've got, or Bill.com or Xero, and make sure I've got all the information there in a correct place as well, so that I'm got everything good to go in my areas there. All right, so I just wanted to show you a little bit about that we have there, and that is pretty much the end of the presentation. I know there's been some questions that have been coming in, so I'm going to pause for a minute. I'm going to take a look at some of the questions that you've got there and see what we can answer for you. I've got a question about a taxpayer identification number. If someone of your recipients did not give you a TIN, but do you still need to do a filing? And that's true, you still need to do a filing. You can certainly do that in Tax 1099. If I go in and click the Add Recipient option here, there's just a button here that says TIN not provided. And so that allows me to bypass entering the taxpayer identification number, and instead of entering that taxpayer identification number, it will go as a blank. Now that will be one that the IRS will flag. They'll follow up with you and say, hey, why didn't you capture this? They'll send you a notice. You as the payer, or if you're a bookkeeper or an accountant, your client as the payer is responsible for collecting a W-9 from every one of your vendors before you issue any payment to them. So that's one of the reasons we built the W-9 tool here to make it easy for you to collect that information. But you can also collect it on paper, but you need to collect it. You got to have that on file so that if anything comes up where the taxpayer identification number and name don't match, you can show the IRS, well, I collected it and this is what they gave me. So it may not be right, I'll recollect it, but this is what they gave me, and that'll kind of get you out of IRS jail for providing the incorrect information there. Let me pull up my questions again here and see what the next one is. TIN match without filing first. So someone asked how to do a TIN match without filing. That's right here. So on this same page that I'm on, request TIN match, I've got that there, and it's another one that I have a bulk option for. So if I wanted to do a whole bunch of TIN matches, I can do that option as well. Someone also asked about correcting forms. Somebody else asked about voiding forms. And so what you do there in either of those situations, a void is simply a correction that goes to zero, $0 amount. So the forms, I went to new forms. I've got all of my forms that are listed here. I could do a corrected form for any one of those. I'm going to pick the miscellaneous because that's usually the one that people are interested in learning about here. But to do that, if I filed it with Tax 1099 originally, so let's say it was a Class Act company form and it was for Glengarry, and it was entered as $7,000 in box 7, should have been 0. I just choose the corrected box up here at the top, and the system's going to remind me I need to enter that. For a void form, I'm going to enter 0. It tells me that as I go in here. And so I would just enter 0 for Gary's form. I click Save and Continue, and that's going to put me into that final page where I'm choosing U.S. Postal Service mail, TIN match, and so forth. So it's a very easy process to do it for a form that's already been filed in Tax 1099. Let's say you've got the other situation, though. Let's say that it's not one that you've already filed. I need to create one. So let's say it was from a couple of years ago. I owned a business a couple of years ago. I filed a form, and now I need to do a corrected form for that, but it's not here. I just click the Add Payer, and I go through. I fill out the form here. It'll add it to my list of payers here. Same thing for recipient. I add the recipient. I go through. I put in the information. I click Add, and it'll add the recipient here. And then I'll just zero that out, or I'll change the dollar figure, whatever the situation may be for that case. So I've got the ability to come in and do those corrected form filings at any point that I might need to. All right, so let me catch up on the questions here. I've got a couple more that have come in. Let's see. Okay. Another question about corrected forms. If I've done one that had an incorrect TIN or an incorrect name on it, that one, like I said, is a little bit more complicated. It's a two-step process. So in that process, I'm doing exactly this. I'm voiding out the form for Glengarry, and let's just pull up Glenn's information here. Let's say that Glenn's social security number is actually 810 instead of 801. I've just got a typo in there, or with the handwritten W-9. Sometimes you can't read them. Sometimes you just don't get the right stuff in there. But let's just say that I've transposed a couple of numbers there. So what I have to do first is void the form that had the wrong information on it. So I would do this same process. I would void a form for Glengarry with the wrong information. Then the next thing that I would do is come in and do a new form. It would not be a corrected form, and I would want to if it's a wrong 10, I would want to add Glenn in again with the different 10. I don't want to edit Glenn's information. I want to add Glenn in again with that wrong information. So again, we have steps for doing all of these things in our knowledge base. So right here under the support menu in knowledge base, if you click that and you go and you search for correction, there'll be a type 1 correction and a type 2 correction. Type 1 is the easy one. You just change the amount. Type 2 is the complicated one that we're just been talking about there. So that's how you go about doing that that process. All right. Someone asked about coming through and doing an import with a lot of different payers and a lot of different recipients. You can absolutely do that through the same import process. I showed you a simple one for demonstration purposes, but if you've got, let's say, 5 or 10 or 100 or 1,000 payers that you need to do all at one time, when I go through this process, and again, this is going to be a simple one, but I'm going to pull it out to the third step here so you can see what I'm talking about. If I have multiple payers on my spreadsheet, they will all appear here at the top. I've got class X, so you can see payer. It says select a payer, and I didn't pay any attention to this at all before because I'm only doing one. But let's imagine I have 10 or 20 or 100. I can select them all, and I'll see class act here and see this little collapse option here. I can collapse them down so that I can see just if I have mistakes in class act or super services or Joe's Car Wash or whatever the payer name is, I can have all of that available here for that information. If you've got all that on the spreadsheet, then it is pretty easy to go through and import. I would suggest if you've got several dozen or a few hundred of them, I would suggest maybe cutting it into multiple imports just so you don't kind of overwhelm yourself with the numbers that are out there. But you certainly can import more than one at a time. Maybe 10, maybe 20 at a time instead of 1,000 at a time, just for that process. Another thing you can do if you have the same recipient, but let's say you have 2 payers, you have 2 companies, and you use the same accountant for that same company, you can copy a recipient from one payer to another payer. If you've got the recipient under payer A, then you can copy the recipient from payer A to payer B. So let's say this R.R. Smith, he's in 1095 test company, but let's say that I really wanted him to be also in the ski shop. So I could put that there, I could click OK, and I would add him to that. He'd still be in 1095 test company, but it'd also be in the ski shop now, and it'd just push over his recipient information. Question about purchasing stock for forms. No, our forms print on plain white paper. So if you want to print the copies from Tax1099, you'll just print them on plain white paper. Those go to the recipient. You do not send anything to the IRS when you use Tax1099 because we take care of that for you. That's the primary function that you're paying us for is the eFile, so that you're not having to produce a 1096. You're not having to create those red forms and bundle them up together and send them with hope and a prayer that they get to the IRS. We're doing them for you through the eFile service, and you'll get a notification back when those forms are accepted, stating that that your forms have been accepted. And then another question about syncing into QuickBooks. So QuickBooks, there's a couple of different things that you may do. There's a desktop version, there's an online version. I can quickly cover both of those. I can't actually go through the syncs because I'm not linked here on this computer that I'm on, but there are 2 different ways that you can do the desktop version. There's one way to do the online version. The desktop version, we have both a plugin and a web connector. So the plugin is something that you install on your computer or on your server. If you have QuickBooks on a server, then you would install the plugin there. We've got a downloadable here where you download it. It has all these instructions in it. And basically, it's a lot of instructions, but basically what this does is it just runs itself. You download the file, you extract it, and you double click it, and it takes you through this process that you see here with these represented by these screenshots. After it installs, you have to allow us to go in and access Social Security information by choosing these options here. And then you go through this instruction in QuickBooks Desktop, upload your data in your Tax 1099 credentials, and we'll start that process. And what you do from that point is you wind up in that same import grid with the green dots and the yellow dots and the red dots. And so it'll bring you right in for that process. The other way to do the desktop is using what's called a web connector. So QuickBooks built or has a tool, I should say, embedded in QuickBooks Desktop that allows vendors like us to sync data over, and that's just a downloadable here. You see the download the web connector, that link right there. And again, we've got pictures that take you through the process of doing all of that web connector process. So pretty easy process for doing either one of those types of items. However, if you run into any problems, that's where our support comes in handy. So you can just click the button down here at the bottom right corner, that little blue smiley face down there. You can click that and you can start a conversation with us. We can even schedule a time with you to walk you through the process if that's something that you need assistance with. So we'd be happy to do that, not only for QuickBooks, but for anything else that we do here. QuickBooks Online, I'm going to click on QuickBooks Online real quickly. For QuickBooks Online, we have an app in the App Center, and again, I don't have the credentials for that, but you can touch this from the QuickBooks Online side if you just search for us in the Intuit App Center. I think it's apps.intuit.com, or you might find it in the Apps menu on your QuickBooks Online account. You can attach the app into in QuickBooks Online for Tax 1099, just search for Tax 1099, and it will bring the data over. And again, it'll put you in the import grid. So it's the same process that we ran through before for importing your data from QuickBooks Online. All right. Well, with that, I think I've answered all the questions that have come in so far. We've got 3 or 4 minutes left for the session here. But if you have any other questions, please pop them in there. If there aren't any other questions, then Geneva and I just want to thank you for attending our session today, and look forward to working with you as we come into the tax season. Don't forget that we are available 8 to 6 Central Time throughout the year, and in January, the last couple of weeks of January, we expand our support hours to 8 to 8 Central Time, so we can help our clients who are working through the process and trying to meet that January 31st deadline to offer some support to you guys as you're working through that filing process. Thanks again for everyone for attending, and we will send out the recording, or we will post the recording to the link that Geneva shared earlier, and the handout is available in the right side of your screen under the handouts. Hope everybody has a great rest of your day.